Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is AJ from the Paladin Journal, and we are back with another Rings of Power Season 2 review. This time I'm going to be covering episodes 4 and 5, and let me just start off by saying that this is where I feel that the show is once again losing its way. They started off fairly strong with the first 3 episodes, although I felt that juggling all those disparate storylines was really putting a damper on the overall structure of the season, and that is very much borne out by these next 2 episodes because literally the story is all over the place. They literally do not have any time, any place to cover all of the storylines with the respect that those storylines deserve, irrespective of how I feel about those stories. And it's just sad that this is what we're getting because yes, this is a show that is visually it's an amazing feast. All the actors are pretty much incredible, but they're just getting lost with this jumble of storylines. And because of that jumble, the characters are not getting the time that they deserve, and the development is just continuing to fall. Just the quality is just falling. Now, where we left off in episode 3, there was a bunch of cliffhangers, specifically with what's happening in Numenor, what's happening with some of the elves, and all of that stuff. And then episode 4 just kind of takes, its own direction because now we're back to covering what is going on with Poppy and Nori and the stranger, and surprise, surprise, Tom Bombadil is here. Oh my god, and it's like, yeah, really not a fan of that. I enjoyed seeing more of Kieran Hins on the show because his Dark Wizard is just absolutely fantastic. But he the big bad of the season? Like, what is going on? You literally have one of the most famous uh, British actors, you know, British, Irish, British. Sorry, he's literally one of the most famous actors you have on the show, and you also gave him one of the possibly one of the best parts on the show this season, but you're not using him. Like, we are down to 5 episodes, right? 5 episodes out of a total of 8, and all we've really seen of him is just glimpses. It's like a minute here, a minute there, and that's really it. So is he a threat? Is he even going to be a threat for the season, or are they going to keep him for the next season? That's the question I'm asking myself after having watching episode 5 today. So there's just that going on. Even in episode 4, I was expecting there to be something more explosive, although they spent most of the time introducing us to the larger world of Tolkien with introducing the stewards, who are a branch of hobbits that we haven't seen before. And as it turns out, the Harfoots are actually descended from the stores. And that was like, okay, I have no idea how valid that is from the Legendarium. It actually doesn't really even matter. I thought it was a really interesting storyline, what they were doing, introducing us to another branch of hobbits, because these guys live in a very different life. The Harfoots, they're nomads, and they migrate from one end of Middle Earth to the other. But the Stewards, they live in the deserts of Rhûn. They live in this one like canyon kind of place. It's static, but it's kind of like a barren world. So, it contrasts very strongly with how we saw the hobbits in season 1 with how we have seen them pretty much in season 2. And it's one of the most fascinating things, right? Because it opens up the world building so much. And there's like so much you can do, and that just adds itself to the overall weight of the storyline that's going on. Now, having said that, I'm kind of worried about the direction of that story, so to speak, because what we see in this episode, it was very trite. It was very matter of fact. It was very, just by the numbers. Oh, there is kind of an oppressed clan of people who can't really defend themselves going up against well, not going up against, but faced with the challenge of facing this huge threat, which are, the Godrim of Rune, the soldiers that the Dark Wizard is using, and the power level is just like, the differential is completely off the scale, pretty much. It's like how in the Lord of the Rings books, towards the end, when the hobbits return to the Shire, they don't return to the Shire that they know. They return to a place that has completely changed in the months that they've been away, because now Saruman and his henchmen, Grima Wormtongue, they have found themselves all the way to the Shire, and they've pretty much taken over the place. Sharku, Sharku, something like that. That's the name Saruman goes by in the Shire when he takes over the place, and he pretty much turns the hobbits against one another, because that's just the kind of person he is. And the hobbits are like, he's repeating what he did in Isengard and with the Fangorn Forest. He's trying to repeat that in the Shire. Having this one last victory over the hobbits who defied him, have this one last victory over Gandalf who defied him, and so on and so forth. So, it's kind of like that's the kind of sense of what they're going for with the Screws, I feel. And I just couldn't vibe with that. It just didn't work for me. It was great to see all of that backstory happen on screen, because it adds more to who the Harfoots are. It adds more to what the hobbits are in general. And there's just this discussion of the hobbits finding a place to live, which eventually in thousands of years is going to be the Shire and Auckland and all of that. So that was a really good point, I felt. However, just referring to some of my notes here, the scenes with the stranger just felt completely flat for me. Number one, they reference something that happened in the books, Lord of the Rings, and something that happened in the movie itself, The Two Towers. When Merry and Pippin, they are introduced to the Ents, and one of them ends up almost eating them. They're just full of whatever the Ent water is, or the stream water, and they've just like eaten so much or something, and they're just relaxing by a tree, and then the tree just starts to like consume them. That's what happens here, and it just felt like, okay, that's like way too referential. That has been a huge downside of the show for me so far. It was like that in season one. It's like that in season two, and it's just like more of the same. And then Tom Bombadil comes out, and it's like, I'll be honest. I read The Hobbit like twice, and that was back in school 19 years ago, 20 years ago, 21 years ago. I do not remember anything about Tom Bombadil. So whatever happens in the show, I'm just taking it at face value, and it's just like, it's completely unnecessary. In episode, I believe it is episode 2 of this season, we see that the stranger is separated from Nori and Poppy, so they end up with the Stewards, and he ends up with Tom Bombadil, and there's the splitting up of the characters to get all this info dump backstory for like half the episode. That was just bad. I think that is completely bad writing. It doesn't add to anything. And what Tom Bombadil does, basically, in all the scenes he's in, is he's just info dumping nonstop to the stranger. He's dropping hints about who he is, who he might be. He's dropping hints about his wife Goldberry. He's dropping hints and in some ways being explicit about what the stranger's supposed to do. There's references to him finding out his name on his own. What his purpose is, that he has to face Sauron, he has to face the Dark Wizard, and all of that. And it's like, hold on, this is like way too much. From everything that I've seen on social media in the last like 2 months, as the hype for the season was building, what I saw from people was like, Tom Bombadil is like one of the most mysterious characters that the professor ever created for Lord of the Rings. And certainly, if you read some of the dialogue that he has from the books, that does come across quite strongly. Because it's like, he's this mysterious person who has been alive for a very long time before the stars and the sun and the moon were created by the Valar, and before, you know, he's quite possibly on a level that is the same as the Valar themselves, which would, make him as old as, Gandalf in many ways, as Sauron, Morgoth, Manwë, and all Aule, and all those guys, Nienna. So there's all that mystery about him. There's a mystery about Goldberry, um, who is like the daughter of a riverman or something. But it's like there's so much mystery about those characters, and then he speaks in riddles. That's the thing with Tom Bombadil. But in the show, he's like, yeah, he just info dumps. He tries to be mysterious, and he shows off a lot of the power that he has. And the stranger's like, "Can you teach me? Can you teach me? I want to know." It was like the stranger has no power of his own. He has no self control over his magic, and it always goes wrong. So that's all there, and it's like it just felt so unnecessary. And like I said in the previous video that I put out, they are really dragging out this thing way too long. The best time to tell us who the stranger is what it was at the end of season one. Now we are like, more than halfway through season two, and we still don't know who he is. He's presumably Gandalf, but what is the point of dragging that mystery out? It's not really a mystery anymore because there's so much referential stuff to the mannerisms that Ian McKellen had in the movies. There's so much referential stuff to the dialogue from the movies, from the books that he has with all the other characters around him in the journeys. And it's like, just tell us. Like, are they trying to, like, I don't know, give us an explanation of how Olorin becomes Gandalf? Or how Olorin becomes Mithrandir? It's like, okay, I don't know what you guys are doing. It's like, it's not really working because, again, there is stuff happening in the story, but it doesn't really feel like we're moving towards any sort of conclusion. And that's really my biggest criticism of that entire storyline. And it's like, yeah, you see some characters on screen for one episode, and they're missing for another episode, and then they come back, then they're gone again, and then they come back. It's like, yeah, it's like you really didn't need all of this Hobbit story in the show anyway. I still believe that if they cut out all of that story from season one and season two, I don't think anything really changes. You can even remove the stranger entirely and all of that. Just completely remove that. And you can tell a more focused story about the war in Eregion and Sauron's rise to power, Sauron's corruption of Numenor, and the fall of Adar, even though Adar is a character created for the show, and the forging of the rings and how that changes all of Elvendom. So, and all of Dwarf. Now, there's also stuff happening with the Pelargir story, which is where all the survivors of the Rise of Mordor have gathered, all the men that have gathered there, and they're led by Arondir and by Theo, and there's whole nonsense that's going on there with one of the characters that Isildur is hanging out with, possibly being a spy for the humans who have sworn allegiance to Adar. And like I said last time, it's like they're setting up some kind of a story, a romantic story between Isildur and Estrid, and that comes across even more ham-fisted in this episode. It was like approaching levels of cringe, and there's already been so much cringe. And I just felt that while the individual subplots were really good, and they dealt with something that is at the heart of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, which is how the natural world is perverted by evil and it falls into darkness, and how that changes not just the natural world, but the people who live in that. And that references to all the creatures who are part of it, that references the Ents themselves. and that references how the elves over time are changing. That references how the hobbits are changing over time, and I felt that that part of the larger story was really good. But in the end, it's just a set piece. It doesn't really connect beyond the most superficial to anything else, and it's just a thing on its own. And it's all happening in a bubble. And I just wish it wasn't on screen. Basically, like it's nice. It's really nice to see more of the Ents, right? We see the Ents in Rune. We see the Ents in Pelargir or around Pelargir, and there's such a good contrast between those scenes and what they mean. But in the end, like I said, it's like it's either referential stuff or it's just like happening in a bubble. So it's not really advancing the storyline in a meaningful way. It's like, okay, so these characters need to have some kind of an epiphany. They need to have some kind of a resolution with regards to their relationships with each other. Theo perhaps accepting what happened with his mother and accepting Arondir as a mentor, as some kind of a father figure, maybe, and Isildur having some kind of a self realization. Although, it's like nothing really happens. So it's like we're just getting lost in the weeds. And then something I really felt was wrong here was that the the story with Galadriel having one of the rings and Gilgalad, the High King, sending her and Elrond and a small party of elves to Eregion to, warn Celebrimbor about Sauron, Halbrand, which was like, okay, yeah, I really like this, and I want to see more of this. If the whole episode had been just about that particular journey, I would have been ecstatic because there's so many twists and turns in that story that I really liked. And while in the beginning it seems like okay, so Elrond he doesn't really trust Galadriel as long as she's wearing the ring, right? And she's trying to give him some kind of guidance about the path that they need to take, but he doesn't listen to her. So he keeps making mistakes because his distrust of Galadriel is overpowering his logical, the logical part of his brain. And that sets up a really interesting conflict between those two characters. But I also felt that it was being pushed too far. Elrond was way too condescending towards Galadriel, and even when a certain like climax type scene happens towards the end of the episode, it's like he really dismisses what she's doing, and I felt that it was a departure for the kind of character that Elrond has been introduced to us before, and how he changes over the years, over thousands of years, to become the Elrond we know of from the movies. Now, of course, there needs to be a lot of character development happen over all of that span of time, and it's all very important. But I felt that he's introduced as her best friend in season one. Literally the only person willing to hear her side of what she's feeling about her hunt for Sauron, how that is changing her and her fears and everything. And now he's just like this. He's basically a prick. And like Robert Arameo, he is, he's fantastic in the role. But it's like, yeah, the character is really not working at the moment. Even like towards, the scene, there's an action scene that happens between with all the elves and a supernatural threat, which the intro of that was really good, and I loved it. But again, it felt too cheesy when we saw supernatural elements in the Lord of the Rings movies. You know, you could really feel the weight of that moment. Like when Aragorn and the others they go into the mountain and they are talking to the dead who betrayed Isildur, thousands of years ago. You really feel the weight of that supernatural horror. That is missing here. This was just like, oh yeah, we just need some quick action scene at this point to, heighten the tensions and so on and so forth. So let's do it. I was like, like not really. So that was like, and that's the point, right? There's so much going on with all the storylines that it's all getting lost. And then, that brings us to Numenor. And Numenor was like, once again, it was something really fascinating. And I don't really have much criticism of that stuff. But because it's more like, you see how Numenor is changing, right? Even more than whatever we saw in season one, whatever we saw in like episode two. Here we can really feel the winds changing, and the way that's that plot line ends in the episode, that was like a big like oh my god moment. I thought it was pulled up really well, and it just like I didn't see that as being too referential, but it was more like okay, yeah, they have already set the groundwork for that, and it's happening now, and I can accept that because that's story development. You introduce it's like Chekhov's gun kind of thing. When you introduce a concept, you have to do something with the concept. You can't just like introduce a concept and not do anything with it. But here they do something with that, and I thought the whole scene, it has you on the edge of your seats. So that part is like really good, but once again, let down by the fact that it's just not, it's like the impact of all these storylines is being lost because there are just so many stories. The acting is still fantastic. Um, all the locations and the vistas and everything still looks amazing. Whether it's the grandness of Eregion and Lindon, or whether it's being down in the weeds near Pelargir and all of that stuff. So, it's like there is some interesting stuff going on here, but it's really not enough to like, make me want to like naturally just be like, okay, I want more, I want more, I want more. It doesn't have that feeling. Whereas like, if I go back to watch even like, the Hobbit movies or Lord of the Rings movies, like, yeah, I have this natural inclination to keep watching and not feel like, it's a chore. Which then brings us to episode 5, which I watched today. And let's focus on the dwarves for a bit. The dwarves are really not in a good place right now. Their realm, Casa Doom, it's pretty much in peril. They have no sunlight. They can't grow their crops. Their stone singers are failing, and they're just struggling every which way. So when Celebrimbor and Anatar invite them to and explain to them about the forging of the rings for the dwarves, it's like, oh yeah, that's going to be a great moment, But it's like I felt that the rings were made too quickly. We don't spend time on the forging of the rings, and there's no real discussion with the characters about what really portends. Which is like, don't you kind of want to have that? It's like this is something that is central to all the lore in the entire franchise. The franchise at large is called Lord of the Rings. The show itself is called Rings of Power. They like just stumbled through the making of the rings, the three rings in season one. Now we have the dwarven rings being made, and it's like they're spending like maybe a couple minutes on it. It's like, yeah, that's like it doesn't have again, it doesn't have the impact. It should be a big freaking deal, but it seems like the story's just barreling through, and you know, with everything that we see in this episode, I am more like concerned than ever that yeah, they're definitely doing the Fall of Khazad-dûm on the show, and that really bothers me because once again, it's an event that happens in a completely different age, thousands of years removed from any of these characters. But just because the Balrog is called Durin's Bane, and they have chosen to name both the king and the prince Durin on the show, it's like, yeah, they're just like, yeah, if you're not gonna have Durin's Bane now, then when the hell are we gonna have it? Which is like, it's kind of the problem you guys created yourself. It just, it's just so frustrating, you know. And then just with all the everything that's going on with the rings and the king using the ring that he's given, he has all the rings, by the way. Um, Celebrimbor's like was like, yeah, you can just have all these rings, distribute them as you see fit. You know, so he off screen, all of that happens off screen. He just gives them the rings, and then it's like, the king is like, he starts going mad because that's what the rings do, and and the way that the dwarves are made, the rings have a very different effect on them than they do on the elves, of course, and the effect that they'll have on the men eventually. So it's like the corruption of the dwarves is happening on a very different axis than what Anatar wants, but it's still happening. And it's really sad to see because it makes you all the more worried for what's going to happen with Prince Duran and Disa. Because I'm telling you right now, I'm like super scared for these guys. I'm thinking that they're just probably going to die very soon. It's like the fear is just like building up inside me. And, compounded to all of that, we have one of the biggest moments of the franchise as it relates to Dwarven lore, which is the forging of the Doors of Durin. The doors that were created or forged by Narvi, one of the greatest Dwarven smiths ever, in conjunction with Celebrimbor, the greatest the second greatest Elven smith ever, succeeded only by his own grandfather, Fëanor. So it's like, huh, they spend like maybe a minute on the Doors of Durin, and it just like comes out of the blue, and I'm like, wait, what's going on? I think it was in episode 2 or maybe episode 3 that they show Celebrimbor and Myrddania, standing on some kind of ledge on one of his towers, and he's showing her the runes that he made, Ithilden. And the scene with Doors of Durin doesn't even mention anything of the sort. And Narvi is like, yeah, there's a password, and it's only going to be known by men, or sorry, not men. It's only going to be known by friends. And they cut to Anatar, and Anatar's like, he really can't be freaking bothered by any of this. He thinks it's frivolous, and then he gets mad at Celebrimbor for just like talking too much or something. I was like, this is so weird. And just like the way that Charlie Kirk plays the character of Anatar, Sauron, it's just amazing, And I absolutely love everything that he's been doing on the show, but it's like when they are going down the path of we need to show how he's manipulating Celebrimbor and Myrddania and all the other elves in Eregion, it's like, okay, I really like this because his influence is subtle. He manipulates people with their own words, you know, twisting what they are seeing, and he's just like, pretty much pulling the wool over their eyes. But he's so much worse with it on Celebrimbor. But what bothers me is that whenever they cut to Anatar, his expression is like he's confused talking to Celebrimbor, which was like I would have preferred a more, kind of like a more leering supervillain in those scenes, but he's more like he's kind of like bumbling his way through everything, which was all the more apparent when they had forged the rings for the men, and mistakes are being made, and a disaster happens, and then you ask yourself, did was that intentional, or was actually an accident? And then it's like, wow, it's like this guy is just like pulling out all the stops. He's desperate, but it is what it is. And I felt that whenever he's manipulating the people around him, he's really playing up the role that he has. Like he's Sauron in disguise, and he's got his hooks in everybody, and he has positioned himself, in just the perfect place to do everything that he wants, and he's like not gonna stop or anything, which contrasted so well with Celebrimbor's growing reticence with the project, and he's talking to Anatar, and he's like, yeah, I'm not gonna make rings for men. They are unpredictable. You know, they have no control over themselves, whatever, and their fate is their own. But it's like, why did we do it for the dwarves? You know, and like I said, there's so much happening in the show, which just basically is okay. This needs to happen. This needs to happen, and this needs to happen. But we're not really giving each subplot the attention that it deserves, the gravitas that it deserves, the respect it deserves. So characters, they just like talk on the screen, and it's a lot of info dumping and whatnot, and you're not really getting to see something behind the character, not for most of them, sorry. And it is once again super irritating, you know and then like let's move on to Numenor once again, and then we witness the fallout of everything that happens in episode 4, and it's like, oh my god, it's like Farazan is now king, and Kemen, his son, is like the biggest asshole on the planet, pretty much. And while I'm so frustrated by the character of Kemen, Farazan is perfect because Tristan Gravel is playing him beautifully, and you really see that scheming politician kind of guy. He's a reflection of what Sauron is doing in Eregion, but in his case, he actually has power over all of Numenor right now, and he's making his moves, doing things to solidify his power, which then like contrasts with what Kemen is doing, and he's just a super prick. Basically, he's been like that. He's been this confused prick for 2 seasons, and nothing is changing for him on season 2. And then we have Iarian doing all this stupid stuff, and I just want to like slap both of them. It's like, wake up, you know. Like Kevin, I can kind of understand. He's been brought up in a way that makes him, you know, that makes him question the old beliefs of Numenor. Because Tristan Gravel, sorry, not Tristan Gravel, our Farazan, his like philosophy is that the world is for men. We hate the elves. We are gonna do whatever it takes to establish supremacy for men, right? And then you contrast against everything that Arn is doing, and it just confuses the hell out of me. Because Elendil, he's one of the faithful. Valandil is one of the faithful. Presumably, Isildur and Aryan, they are also of the faithful. And here we have Aryan, who she tells her father that whatever she's doing it to get justice for the grief of her loss, which is the loss of her brother Isildur. But the writers are not showing us anything of their relationship. There was like 1 or 2 scenes in season 1, but all of that is just like, it's like not even the bare minimum that they have to be doing. We don't see her actually grieve. She has just become this like supremely unlikable character, and she's betraying her own family. She's betraying her brother's friends, and her character is just becoming like this. It's like it's actually like her character is kind of becoming repulsive, and I just don't get that. I don't get what the point of the character is. Like she's an architect, but she is like a journeyman. She's not even an accomplished architect. And so is she the one who's going to end up building the Temple of Melkor in season 3 or 4 whenever Sauron is finally in Numenor once again? What is the point of her character? why introduce a character within the House of Elendil that is a traitor to the Valar, that's a traitor to the friendship with the elves, that's, you know, basically someone who hates Iluvatar. And it's like that kind of conflict. The show doesn't need that kind of conflict. There's plenty of conflict within the characters that we already know. So Iarian being this like forced perspective into the show, it just really rankles, because she's just not jiving with anything that's happening with any of the characters. And it's just like making a huge mess of things, especially in the interactions she has with Valandil and with Elendil in this episode, which I thought was like absolutely like scum of the earth kind of dialogue. The one thing I also really appreciated though in this episode was that Muriel finally tells somebody else about the visions she's seen in the Palantir. Like she told about them to Galadriel in season one, but no one else. No one else knows. Not even like Iarian when she stole the Palantir. She has no freaking idea what the thing does or what is, the deal or everything. But I did find it frustrating that Muriel doesn't give him the whole truth. And, there's like not much of a reaction from Elendil. So the setup for that scene was so good, but then the setup just fails. And I'm like, Elendil should have reacted in some way. Maybe like do something that's like indicative of his actions later on in the lore that we know that, or I guess Isildur is the one who took some clippings from the tree in the palace. But just like, give us an indication that, he's preparing something. I guess they need him to go on some kind of a journey. I've seen some like, spoiler screenshots about him from episode 6 and 7, which is like, okay, it's kind of whatever. And I'm just like, there's this whole like disgrace thing that's happening, the storyline that's happening in Numenor. It's like, okay, it's like whatever, but it's like, so anyways, we come back to what's going on with Durin and Disa towards the latter half of the episode. And, when this is where Anatar's manipulation of Celebrimbor really comes to the fore, right? Because Prince Durin is worried about his father. He goes to Celebrimbor to ask him for, some kind of an explanation of what's going wrong and everything. And then Celebrimbor and Anatar talking. It's like, okay, once again, Anatar is pulling out all the charm. He's manipulating Celebrimbor again. But it's like, yeah, the stories are moving way too fast. The corruption of King Durin the Third, it should be a pretty big freaking deal. But, with so much that the episode already has to juggle and everything that needs to happen and everything that they're making happen in the season. And I'm like, we've already had the forging of the Dwarven rings in this episode in this season, and for sure now they're gonna give us the forging of the rings for the men by the end of the season. Season episode 7 came out yesterday. Episode 8 comes out next week. Episode 8's the finale, and they're definitely gonna end on the forging of the rings for men. And it's just like, I'm so done. It's just like they had to compress 2,500 years of story into a single year. They had to compress all of that long scale uh, story development into these cramped 8 episode seasons. And, it's like episode 6 and 7, they're probably going to deal with the war in Eregion. And, it's going to be something really crazy that they do. And it's just not going to make sense. And then it's like, Well, what are we gonna leave on the table for the next 3 seasons? The show is has been confirmed for 5 seasons. So it's uh, like there are ways to tell these stories in a way that could stretch out the material. But it seems that the writers are not interested in stretching out the material. They're just cramming everything that they can, which is, if you look at these 2 episodes together, cramming Tom Bombadil on the store's end, it feels like that nothing on that front even happens in episode 5. So, once again, we have a gap, and then episode 6 will do something with them, and then they'll be missing for episode 7, and then they'll do something in episode 8. It's like this juggle is just like it's painful to watch, and then we're gonna have to wait like 2 years for season 3, and once again, that's gonna kill momentum. It's like, what are we even doing? It's like that is streaming is killing these TV shows. These TV shows are not made for such long gaps. If anything, just film it 2 seasons at a time or something. I don't know. Or just film the next 3 seasons together and then just release them, over time. I don't know. Do something that gives us a faster release. A yearly release is the most ideal. It's the best way to do it. It's worked for like 60 years, 70 years. It can work for now. You know, the nature of, and then also it's like, so how long have we had Rings of Power season 2? We had a 3 episode premiere and then 5 more episodes. So that's, 3 episodes, you go to the 4th episode. That's 1 week. The 5th episode, 6th episode, 7th episode, 8th episode. Just 5 weeks. The show is going to be done in 5 weeks. And it's like, wow. That is like, that speed is just huge. And, right now, in many ways, it's kind of like a crammed season 2 because, excuse me, because the next MCU show is already out, Agatha All Along. And that had like a 2 episode premiere, I think. And that's also probably going to end up being like an 8 or 10 episode season. There's so much more stuff that's come out on Netflix already, like the Terminator anime. And it's like, there's like way too much stuff. And, this show is already so dense that, you really need time after each episode to like, let it unwind in your mind. So I'm really not sure about any of this right now. I thought the first 3 episodes were fairly decently okay, and they had some decent momentum going in. But now with episodes 4 and 5, I think that momentum is in serious danger of just grinding to a halt. And given some of the stuff I've seen about episode 7 today, I'm just like, yeah, we're gonna talk about that when I get to that video. But just suffice to say, the writers are just doing things for, you know, just the hype of it. There really is no clear plan. All these actors ultimately are just being wasted because none of them are getting the true room, the actual room that they need to develop their characters. And every single character is like, every single actor is spot on. Whether we're talking about Rory Kinnear as Tom Bombadil, Benjamin Walker as Gil Gallant, Margaret Clark, Robert Aramayo, Owen Arthur, Tristan Gobel, Cynthia Dye Robinson, all these actors, they're being done a huge disservice, and it's just like this show is really tiring me out. I have not been, I've not hidden that particularly. So, even on social media, when season 1 was coming out, there were so many things I thought were wrong with the show. I covered a lot of that in season 1 video. And this season is like, it's making me lose faith. And at this point, it's like, I'm watching it just so I know myself what was done on the show rather than relying on secondhand accounts, which, they can become, morphed. They can be twisted. So I'm just watching it because, I'm, it's just it's basically just a job now. I'm not enjoying it as I hoped I would, and that is just like putting a crimp on things. However, there is one small silver lining in all of this. We are getting the War of the Rohirrim animated movie or TV show, whatever it is. That's coming out very soon, and I am like hyped for it. The trailer came out a few days ago, and that trailer is just like it blows the mind. Seriously, the characters look to be amazing. The story is amazing. It's all about Helm Hammerhand himself and his daughter Hera, and this war that happened between the people of Rohan and the Easterlings, and just the visuals look amazing. And of course, it's going to be a very tight, contained story. So we don't have to worry about them compressing thousands of years of events and characters into like 1 year and just a handful of characters. So it's like that's going to be completely different. But we'll see what happens when that comes. Anyways, that's me for the video, guys. Be sure to check out everything else. If you like this one, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time when I cover episodes 6 and 7, which will hopefully be this weekend, because I really need to move on. I have so much catch up to do with all the other projects that are coming out that I've already mentioned right now, and so much more than that. And I'm like way behind on stuff. So see you guys soon. Bye. Cheers.